I ran marketing departments in corporate America for 10 years and then ran a digital agency for over another 10 years. So I know the roadmap to online success, and that formula always includes producing content to share your message, from your marketing message to sales and delivery. Hi, I'm Jennifer Neal, and you're listening to the Content Toolbox. I believe the secret to finding and creating raving fans online is through you. In building relationships through stories that share who you really are, create genuine, crazy, raving fans that keep begging you to take their money. And on this podcast, we'll be talking strategies, tactics, tips, and more with myself and other industry experts. So buckle up and start your engines, because it's go time. All right. I would like to welcome to the podcast today my good friend, Duff Gardner. Duff comes to us with over 30 years experience in this business world that we are in, and is a master of content in a fun revenue generating kind of way. So welcome, Duff.
Oh, thank you, Jen. Thanks. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while. So
yeah, me too.
All right. So Duff, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of your background and history and kind of where your expertise lies?
Sure. So a few years ago, Jen, before even I got to know you, my kids who are now in their mid-20s were, sort of getting into university. And so I had fallen into like a lot of consulting type work, and I had decided that I wanted to get into something new. It was just kind of one of those transitional points in life. I was about to turn 50. And so I jumped into the coaching and transformation world, the digital marketing world, and started learning how to do launches and how to build content and all these kind of wonderful things that we do. And I found that my experience in the startup world, launching successful startups, was something that was interesting to people. And so what I do now is I bring what I call startup thinking into the coaching and transformation world. So there is a rigor, like when you're in the startup world, there's a rigor to it that I love. And I think it's something that's missing in the coaching and transformation world. So I do definitely try to bring that. And I've been fun, and I've worked on diverse projects. I've worked on projects with you, which has made life as kind of a, whatever you want to call me, transformation coach, whatever, fun. So yeah, it's nice to be here today.
Absolutely. All right. So this is all about content, and okay. I know that your expertise lies in crafting one of the most important aspects of content that we do as marketers, which is the part that actually puts money in our pockets.
Right.
So tell me kind of how you ended up, like your journey of how you ended up focusing there.
Okay. So you're speaking about offers, because like my signature program is called the Offers That Sell Mentorship. So like an offer to me is the intersection between your marketing and your product development. Like when you're thinking about doing something, it actually should be the first step to think about rather than the last step, which is counterintuitive to a lot of folks. And I didn't actually understand this until I started working with entrepreneurs who were doing this. And, we'd work with them on launches, say. And at the beginning, I didn't have a structured process. And they would always want to move that part of the work to the very end. Like, because, you'd be trying to go like, well, let's talk about the offer. Well, let's just talk about the marketing and how all these different things are going to fit into the campaign. And so as a result, you'd be slammed at the end trying to tweak and optimize and come up with little elements of the offer that they felt were important. And when that happened, it was always really challenging. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at what I do, but, it's stressful. And that's kind of when I realized that, my work in the startup world was really important for people in coaching and transformation, because to be honest, what you work on the entire time is your offer. So for example, like when you're in the startup world, you're trying to raise capital for your technology company. And so say that this happened to me, say that you get invited to present at a venture capital forum. So, you have to work on your pitch, whether it's a 5-minute one or a 20-minute one, doesn't really matter, but it's like, that's what you're going to do. So as a startup, like for sure, you're casting around trying to get onto people's stages, but you do not leave that presentation until the night before and then try to sort of throw something together to sound crafty and irresistible, right? Like you work on it, like you're working till hours of the morning trying to come up with the proper elements of how to describe what it is that you do. And it can be like one little word, or it can be like quite a deep conversation into something like what's the value of what we do? How are we unique? And going deep on those kinds of conversations to come up with something that is attractive to people. So that's kind of how I try to approach things. And, that's my take on offers. So like coming back to like a coach and transformational marketer, I guess, or digital marketer, when you start with your offer, well, let's put it this way. If you leave your offer till the end, it's like building your house on quicksand. It might look good for a little while at the beginning, but cracks will start to form. And then you just end up trying to plug leaks. So the concept of the leaky bucket in digital marketing and coaching world, you can solve that problem in many instances by just really spending the extra time on getting your offer right.
Absolutely. Oh, love that. And so true is that we get all wrapped up in the lead generation and marketing and may not be thinking necessarily about the journey, like where we're trying to take them. So
yeah, for sure. So yeah, I like to focus on that. That's kind of the key thing for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know one of the ways that you're doing that is through the podcast medium as well as other media as well. But I know that's kind of one of your core focuses. So talk to us a little bit about how you're working with podcasts.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, so sort of in a random ways happens sometimes. I got involved in the podcast world. In fact, when I first got involved in podcasting, it was kind of kicking and screaming. I was at an event, a small fulfillment event, a common friend of ours, Jackie McClanagan, and in Hawaii, in Maui, and a fellow presented there and was talking about podcasts. And at the time, I was kind of like, well, I've got some clients who are interested in podcasting, so I'm going to buy a ticket to his event and just see what it's all about and try to learn a little bit about it. It's the last thing I want to start doing is to start getting involved in podcasting, and it's going to be extra work. So I actually ended up diving in head first. I realized actually that the cool thing about podcasting from a content perspective is it's like a push versus, it's a pull versus a push. It's a pull versus a push. So, like a lot of us, you're starting to recognize that this marketplace is becoming very competitive. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things changing in the marketplace. So some people who have run really successful businesses for the last decade using digital marketing are struggling now because what worked even just a couple of years ago does not work. There's a lot of impacts, like there is email deliverability, there's fatigue on the part of people receiving emails, there is a competition of people entering the marketplace. And so, people are comparing different content marketers and digital marketers, and you're lined up on a wall, and they're how they evaluate the value what you give versus someone else is changing all the time. And so what's nice about having more of a pull approach to content marketing versus push is that somebody told me this last year. It's a great metaphor. They said to me, you know what, Duff, you're involved in many dances. So just do that. And so podcasting allows you to kind of dance around in the many dances in life that you participate in and show different nuanced elements of you. And, therefore people get a flavor of you, and you can start to demonstrate how you're valuable, how you're unique. And, instead of trying to be magnetic, you just actually are magnetic naturally to the people who are naturally drawn to you. So the metaphor, if you've got some football fans, I think. So traditional marketing, to me, in many instances, is becoming a thread the needle kind of a thing. Threading the needle in football is when, as a quarterback, you've got your favorite receiver. It doesn't matter if they're being covered by all the defensive backs. You're still going to try to throw that football through all of them to your favorite receiver, rather than taking a more holistic view and saying, who's the open wide receiver. So digital marketing has become a lot of threading the needle. And instead, when you get into podcasting, it's much more of a natural way to show yourself and become attractive. That's where it's more of a pull versus a push. So today, what I do is I work with a lot of podcast folks. So stage one is we have a program called the 30-day podcast funnel. And what that does is it helps people from soup to nuts. They come in, they're one of three people, maybe four people, I guess. So they either are trying to be a guest on podcasts, or they're kind of just starting a podcast, or they're so frustrated they've quit and they've bookshelved their own podcast. They've done some, but they've bookshelved it. And lastly, I guess, is they have a podcast, but they're not generating a lot of leads from the podcast. And so what we do is at that stage, we work with them to create their entire funnel and offer around the podcast. So in other words, if people are going to come onto your podcast, or if people are going to listen to your podcast, you want to try to monetize that podcast, obviously. So we really focus on monetization. We carry that through into our higher end programs as well, where we work with podcasters who have been in the game for a little while, and they're really focused on how do I monetize my podcast better?
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. You just had so much in there. I just want to repeat a little bit and make sure that the nuggets get picked up here.
Yeah, sure. Totally.
So I love the idea of that you just naturally become the attractive character on a podcast, because there is, we talk about keyboard warriors who get all brave, and it's usually a negative connotation. But here on a podcast is you're just talking. It's your personality. You're not worried about putting on airs or doing all of these, it has to be the right words. It's just you talking. And that is, you're right. It naturally just creates that attraction.
Yep.
I love the concept of pull versus push marketing. Yeah. God, that just goes so far. And even in terms of when you're repurposing this content, then it becomes pull marketing across other channels as well.
Oh yeah.
You're just giving a nudge,
That's right. Yeah. I think when a lot of people think about content marketing, especially I'm 54 now, and as fabulous as I am, I still get kind of, it's this feels like a lot of work to me to get into this. So, as a consultant, if you come in and say to people, well, you got to get into content marketing, you got to start producing content here, you got to start producing content there. And, it kind of, for someone my age, it feels like you're going back 10 or 15 years when people are like, yeah, you got to start blogging. And we did. And it was like crickets.
Right.
Right. But the difference about podcast marketing, like you're talking about, is I love doing podcast interviews. It's super fun. I enjoy it like crazy. I do have a 30-minute conversation. It's under 30 minutes actually. And then, you systematize the whole production, which there's a little effort there. But once you get it, you can take that content and turn it into many pieces of content and just kind of push it out there. So it's a very different thing than I got to write blog content, that mentality. It's actually, once you step into it, if you kind of open your mind to it, it's a very refreshing way to market yourself organically. And, one of the groups of people I mentioned is people who have built podcasts. They say they've done 50 episodes or something. And then they're just well, I'm not getting any clients. I'm not monetizing this. It just feels like a lot of work, a road to nowhere kind of thing. And, I love those kinds of clients, because there's ways, like you said, that you can take that podcast asset and start to amplify it and rejuvenate it. And it can be the next thing that takes your business to the destination you want to get it to. So I agree with you 100%. It's the best way right now to grow your online business is with a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many ears listening right now. It's crazy. It's such a great market. And it's not that difficult to get into, like you said. Few things, but then it can become systematized. And,
right now we're living in a world that's exponentially more virtual than it's ever been, and our lifestyles are changing by the day, and, there's uncertainty and blah, blah, blah. But I think that what's becoming super clear is that, people are consuming content in ways that are new all the time. And so developing the skill of doing that, I think for all of us is really, really important. If we have a business, doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're any kind of a contractor or a practitioner, it's important to learn this skill, to get your voice out there.
Yeah.
Like Alexa or Google House. Google, I better not say it quietly because she'll say, what do you want? But, a lot of people consume podcasts that way. They're just hanging around the house and they say, Alexa, play such and such, or it's not just in the car. It's not just on your iPad wandering around. It's in the home now. And we know, we don't know what's next. So it's very
totally
good.
True.
Good. Yeah.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah. That even more years. It's awesome. All right. So one of the things I do like to do is give kind of some tactical recommendations as well.
Right.
So what are, some of the things that you would recommend in terms of podcasting or offers or, avoiding common mistakes that you've seen? Just kind of give us some of your best advice.
Well, okay, two ways to answer that question. So there's this concept of irresistibility. And so I actually have this thing called the irresistibility trap, very, very technical term. But basically, it's this idea that how does it manifest? Like a lot of people think, oh my God, I got to know my niche, or I got to know my avatar is more current way of thinking about that. And so what ends up happening is they turn all Winnie the Pooh. So you go, you find a log, you start think. You start bonking your head, right? Think. And months pass and then you're joining Facebook groups and you're buying new tactical ideas and trainings and stuff. And it's like, what's my niche? And it's over and over again. So the way to think about that in terms of irresistibility trap is, first of all, so the two parts to the question answers. When you focus on perfect messaging for that specific avatar, the first thing that happens is chances are the marketplace will dismiss you. And then the next thing that happens after that is you start to build this internal resistance to everything that you're doing. Then you're like, oh, I got to figure out a way to get clients or get sales. So it's like taking out the garbage. You're going to try it all again.
Then you become Eeyore.
Then you become Eeyore and you're trying to come up with the perfect messaging as Eeyore. And it's this cycle. So it's kind of like this cycle of this idea of irresistibility. It's a term in digital marketing, which has its place. People are challenged to execute on it. So back to startup thinking, if I'm standing in front of a bunch of investors, I'm not trying to be irresistible. Instead, I'm trying to be investable. When you're investable, people trust you and they'll invest their money in you. So one of the first things I do with clients is create that distinction, like irresistibility versus investability is really important. The second way is back to the question of niche. It really stumps people like crazy. But I can point you to tons of people who have high functioning, highly profitable businesses that did not stop them. They just started. I mean, that's part of the beauty of the startup world is you iterate your way to success. You don't sit around and think about it in your man cave until it kind of happens. So the way that I think about, so back to tactical. So there's 5 ways that you build a vibe of it being investable. So it's building that vibration where people are like attracted to you, which is important in podcasts too, right? Because we're talking about pull marketing. So instead of thinking about like, oh my God, what is my niche? Think about it this way. So there's 5 things. So the way that people are attracted to you is through these 5 ways. In other words, another way to say that. Your avatar. So try to figure out who your avatar is. So there's a difference, for example, between an entrepreneur, a local business person, a local franchise owner, or a local franchise owner struggling with cash flow. Like those are different people altogether. What is your transformation? Like how clear your transformation is. So like I had a client who initially was talking about taking people from thinking about traditional parenting to more spiritual parenting. But as she started to talk to people and get clearer on her avatar, she realized it was actually women who were returning to work, who were high functioning executives, who were concerned about things like making the right choices around childcare. So that changed the way she framed the transformation quite differently. Third is your system. People don't spend enough time on their system because like people will come to you based on a system. So for example, in the consulting world, the Gartner Group, they're attractive because of their specific system. That's why people come to them. That's the framework by which they sell themselves. So focus on like framework, systems, techniques that you use. It's important. People want to know to different degrees. Some people that might be the exact thing that brings them into your community. The other thing is, like, what's your journey, your personal story? I just went to an event where it was like an event where people tried to get on podcasts. So like if you've got an 8-step formula that got you onto some podcasts, but the people I really remembered were people who had a really compelling story, like a transformational story that they can impart on their clients. And so there's one other thing that I tell people to focus on, and that's their premise. So premise is like a counterintuitive statement that catches people's attention. It's something that you deeply believe. It's deeper than a why. One way I asked them to think about it is like, where are you rallying against the hype? Like, how do you position yourself differently? And so if you can come up with that kind of a statement, like a negatively framed one, or it can be a positively framed one, like education is killing our children. I want to talk to you about why. Like that's a negatively framed one. But you could also say, like offers are the best way to grow your business. It could be that. You're right. But coming up with something that's counterintuitive to your audience. So when you collectively lump those 5 things together, think of it like if you've ever taken any kind of life coaching or something like that, people will say there's like the life coaching wheel where they'll turn it into a bunch of pie slices. And they might ask you to scale on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how are you feeling about this kind of priority? So of those 5, do that with yourself, put them in like a wheel, sort of say to yourself, like with an avatar, like how clear is the avatar? Maybe it's a 5 today, and some of the other ones are a little bit higher or lower. But here's the deal. Start, because you don't need to be a 10 on description of the avatar. Entrepreneurship and online entrepreneurship, this as an expert marketer, like what's best practice in digital marketing? To be honest, best practice in digital marketing is to think of your entire business as a sandbox,
Yep.
right? And to keep experimenting your way into success. Like, it is not to go and man cave your way to success. It just doesn't happen that way. So this particular case, like, in terms of how you describe yourself as valuable and unique, take that 5-step system and work on it, but use it as permission to start. And one last thing on that, like, think about someone that you follow. Like, it could be Oprah, that's kind of obvious, or Ellen, or somebody. Like, pick anyone in any kind of, it could be an author. Like, why do you follow them? Like, are you the perfect avatar? Are you the perfect niche? Probably not, but you still follow them nevertheless. So why is that? And so just think about that. If you ever get stuck on like, oh my God, I got to know this, just start.
That's awesome. I love that. It's almost reverse engineering the avatar conversation. Because you're right. Mm-hmm. We get, I have to niche down or however you want to say it. But like, think. And we just get stuck.
Totally. Yeah.
Wow. What a great framework. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So one other question that I really like to ask is, on this journey that you've been on for many years, yes, what's one of the most surprising things that has happened to you, even personally, your own transformation, something you never even expected?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I could talk. Like, about a year and a half ago, I had an event where I had to make a presentation of 90 seconds. And can I tell this story?
Yeah, absolutely, if you want
to. So I had to make a presentation for 90 seconds. The goal was to get on people's podcasts. And so it kind of speaks back to this framework I just gave you. We get really persnickety. I'm going to use the word persnickety. We get very persnickety about how we occur to others, and it's like we're our own worst enemies when we try to do that, So this particular group, it was the second time I was presenting. So I presented 6 months prior, and I'd made kind of like a presentation around my 8-step formula. And, I'd gotten a lot of requests to be interviewed, so that was fine. So I was really trying to optimize that. And I was at a table with a woman. There's about 200 people in the room, and we got a chance to practice, and I gave her the practice. And she kind of was like, we become great friends. She's an amazing woman. And she kind of looks at me, she goes like, it's good. I was like, that doesn't seem very convincing. And she goes, it doesn't seem like you're being real. It seems like you're kind of trying to be someone. So I was like, okay. So on the plane on the way down, one thing that's really, besides rescue dogs, which is a really big, important thing for me, I've really wanted to step into the topic of diversity and inclusion much more, because that's part of my journey. Many years ago, I suffered a case of what I felt was bias to me when I had a C-level job. And when it became clear that I was, when I was gay, which I am, by the way, hello, my boss was a woman, and we're friends, but in that case, it was like this weird bias that happened where the next thing, I'm going from respectful strategy conversations to, can you get me a coffee? So it was kind of like, a very strange and unnerving experience for me that I went through. So I was trying to communicate that idea in this presentation, and it went terribly. Anyway, sorry, but I should back up. So on the plane, I'd been thinking about doing this. So when she told me that my idea, like my sort of safe presentation, basically sucked.
Yeah.
They called my name, which, like, I was one of the first people to present. So I had no time to kind of go like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Like, it was happening now. So I go up to the mic and I present. And of course, the sound system's not working. So I have to repeat myself. One of the guys on stage, great guy, I love him. He was a Christian podcaster who had an opinion about this whole thing. And so it was just like this very interesting, live, very vulnerable, unrehearsed presentation where I was talking about playing in the out games in Montreal as a hockey player. It was like a cluster, you know what? But this funny thing happened. I got a standing ovation live, and I got a standing ovation from the live stream. So like 300 to 500 people, I'm not really sure. So, for someone like me who I grew up in Alberta, I'm kind of like meat and potatoes, kind of a guy. I don't know, like it's something that I'd struggled with, how to connect the dots between who I am and what I do in business. And so in that moment, it kind of helped me to connect those dots. And, like I'm a bit more real with my business now. So that was surprising. I did not expect that to happen, but it's had really good results for me. And I've had tons of extra business because people kind of get me now.
I love it because you shared that real vulnerability thing, and it's not a thing, probably perfect scenario because it wasn't even something that you planned or did, and it just the more raw. I mean, we hear it over and over.
Yeah. So that was surprising.
I love it.
More surprising than a bad haircut during the pandemic, but
yes. Which there are a lot of, for sure.
There are a lot of them, yeah.
All right, so closing words. Is there anything else that you would like to share that I've kind of missed touching on here?
I'm just releasing a podcast called Off My Duff, the Entrepreneur Podcast. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, big and small. Our goal is to answer that age-old question: how I need to get off my backside and get started on something. And so I'd love for people to go and check that out once it gets released here and later in May. And I have an expression I say to everybody at the end of my podcast, which is to teach what you love and live from your truth. So that's something that people should think about as they go forward with their online business and thinking about how to build content in this crazy world we live in.
I love it. Teach what you love and live for your truth. Awesome. All right, Duff, if anybody wants to find you and connect with you, where's the best place to send them?
Right now, you can go to duffgardner.com. You could also, if you want, you can go to something called theimpactscorecard.com, which is kind of an interesting way for you to kind of get a bit of an evaluation of your online efforts. So duffgardner.com or theimpactscorecard.com.
Awesome. And we'll make sure those links are included. Duff, thank you so much for being on the show here today and sharing all of this great information and stories.
Thanks, Jen. It's nice to see you. Can I call you the purple one?
Yes.
Thanks, purple one. I know I do on Facebook Messenger. Now I'm doing it on your podcast.
Absolutely. It's okay. It's my branding. I'm leaning into it.
Lean into it.
Thanks
for having me, Jen. All right. Thank you.